So, anyways, take it as you take it as you will. So, thanks everybody, and good morning, everyone. Now I'm going to try and pollute your minds. I'm going to try and really challenge your thinking just for the simple fact that, as we look at drainage within the coastal environment, what are all the features, what are all the factors, and what are the parameters that we're really trying to address? So hopefully by the time I'm finished, I will challenge you a little bit in your thinking and how to go about, addressing things from a coastal standpoint, but with the stakeholder engagement. And I can't say that enough. And Greg, you touched on it earlier, how to get to know your stakeholders. And I'm going to say this even more so with your regulators. So you can kind of see my outline today. We'll kind of touch on each of these topics. So current trends in Florida. So some of the things that we're seeing. So you've seen a whole bunch of different profiles for sea level rise. The bottom line, and what I want to really emphasize, is on the right side of this table. In the beginning, you can see from 1914 up to about 54, about a 50-year period, we were seeing that increase, and you can see the numbers there on the left. As we got into the 50s to the 90s, not much change. You saw some fluctuations, but not really anything significant over the long haul. But now as we reached 94 on, and unfortunately I haven't had a chance to update this with some of the people that I was working with before, you're starting to see that uptick again. And so the question is, how long is this uptick going to last, and where is it going to take us? You can see the projected, essentially the projected slope of that line and what it means, roughly about 4 feet over the course of the 2100. But again, we're still in that flux area. We are increasing, and so it'll be interesting to see where we land. Likewise, this is just a further reinforce what I was talking about on the previous slide. Again, records from way back when, before records were really kept, tide gauge data, and now with satellite data, we've got a lot better idea of what's going on, Miami Beach being the primary constituent of a lot of this, and we'll go over that in just a moment. But you can just see that upward trend. So like I said, as we go in these next few years, it's really going to tell us a lot more of what we can expect. Because again, we've got a lot of areas now that are already dealing with this issue, and how do they, protect themselves more going forward, and what makes the most sense in terms of some of these strategies that we do. So just a little background. I am going to talk about Miami Beach in particular. Picture on the left there, that's actually in March. That's not in the fall when the king tides really occur. So that's in March on the Indian Creek waterway. And you can see just the docks now that are inundated. So again, this is a real common occurrence, and a lot of times it does breach the banks and get out. What I'd like to focus on the right-hand side, though, is this is Miami Beach. And what I think we've kind of hurt ourselves in Florida, what used to be a lot of our coastline protection, the barrier islands and that, to kind of give us that protection against storms, they became great vacation spots. They became great places for development. And so Miami Beach, although probably served as a buffer to Miami many, many years ago, all of a sudden development started taking off, and it's like, wow, this is pretty, nice places out there. And so you've lost that protection. Now, how do we build protection for what used to be protection for the mainland? And that's where we've kind of maybe hurt ourselves as we've gone on in years. So in particular, you can see the area that I'm studying, that I was involved with, specifically with our in the Miami Beach area. And again, the problem here is just, again, you've heard, I think Brent yesterday gave us like 12 different terms for the sunny day flooding, whatever. Bottom line is that when the king tides do come up, and if you had any tropical systems that came in, the intercoastal waterway was recurring. It would back into the system. And so Miami Beach knew that they had to come up with some solutions and make the problem better, or make the problem lesser, excuse me. So you can see here highlighted. And I'm going to show a couple other pictures here in a few moments of inundation. But what you can see here is, again, you've got a fairly long waterway that, again, the beach, and I should have given you guys a profile, would have helped a little better. The beach itself slopes up to about elevation 11. But as you get into the intercoastal area, you're down at about elevation 1 and 3. With the tides coming in the way they were and backing into the storm sewer systems, it was causing all the grief within the roadway. So a lot of the pictures you see in Miami where cars and buses are going through all these flooded roadways, this is where those systems were being compromised. So again, Miami Beach's response to that was, okay, let's start looking at pump systems. How do we mitigate for this? And again, I'm going to show you a few pictures here in a moment to make it more palatable for what we have out there without having to raise all infrastructure. Miami's got 3 areas that they've focused on already. Some areas they went ahead and jacked roads up. consequences of that, though, is that it started impacting buildings because the road came up, the infrastructure didn't. So now the road's sitting higher, water was flooding into some of these businesses. Now they weren't being insured. So now those first floors had to become storage. They had to become restaurants. They had to become something other than what the intended purpose was, which was living space. So again, it's one thing to do some corrective actions, but have you thought the process through thorough enough to understand what that's going to mean for you? So as we do some of these remedies, have we projected it out enough to know what are the long-term ramifications, and then more importantly, what are the maintenance and upkeeps, even for BMPs? As you guys just heard in the previous conversations, there's a lot of BMPs that all touted to be, this is the best thing ever, but the reality is, what's the maintenance upkeep and the long-term commitment to them? So same thing with a lot of these coastal things that we're looking at here for managing. So now here you can kind of see street level what this equates to. And this building itself is a historic building, so a lot of concerns on protecting the foundation, but more importantly, keeping this, as a historic monument to the area with its significance. And then you can just see some of the impacts that are caused to the roadways. Likewise, you can see where you got water backing in from that intercoastal area into the roadway. So again, putting pumps out here, not really a lot of value gained by that. So now you got to kind of plug the system up, convert it from a gravity system more to a pressure system, and then give that relief off, and then allow the roadways to open back up. Because again, you can see here on the side, what are some of those impacts and the unintended consequences of this? And probably the biggest thing is first responders. If they do have to get in here now, what are the routes that they have to take, and what kind of MOT do they need to be up against, to kind of to basically get around this area and get to wherever their intended destination is. So a lot of issues that come up on this. Another thing for Florida, coastal retreat. This is up in the Panhandle, and it's more specifically Cape San Blas. And it's up in the Panhandle where you can see the gradation of the soils here. So a lot of sediment transport. It's it's migrated over the years many a times. But what I want you to focus on, and I think the cursor worked, this area right in here. So you can see where the coast is. That's roughly about 300 feet back from the coastline. Fast forward from 71 to 2021, now you can see where the coastline is in relationship to that road. So you can see how some of these sediment transport areas become really dynamic. We've got other areas in Florida. This isn't the only one. I'm going to show you another one in a few moments, but you can just see the differences in that. And this area was breached by Hurricane Michael. So and what you see along the coastline right in here, and I'm going to go ground level if I can find my curve. There we go. Yeah, right in here, we've got some fairly large rubble just to protect that road and protect it against some of that migration. Some of the property owners to the north, they've put in some tombolos to kind of basically recruit sand and help their situation. But then, as you know, it starves off sediment going to the south, and then it makes this situation even worse. And then here's a ground perspective of what we've got out there on that road. So stormwater management, well, good thing is you're in sandy soils, but the question is what are your nutrients that might be in this area? The good thing is not a lot of generation of EMCs or main concentrations for the roadway runoff. That's the good thing. And then the ecology is pretty much, established itself for the conditions that are out there. So now let's talk design risk, or design criteria and risk. So as we do more work within the coastal area, and this is another picture of Indian Creek Drive, you can just see again the breadth and the magnitude of the flooding that occurs out there. So as we get into that, asset management, I can't stress that enough. What do we already have? So what do we already have in place? What's the age of that infrastructure? And what's the desired service life of what improvements we're going to do? Is it now time to kind of basically reconstruct everything? Do it holistically. So not only the roadway, move the roadway up or elevate the roadway, but then utilities. Should we go ahead and replace utilities at that time and make this whole area more robust? Also, what about more resilient and sustainable type products? Do we now look at more less than steel reinforced products, but more fiber reinforced seawalls? Same thing with drainage structure, same thing with pipes. What are those things? Because, again, we're seeing surface water impacts here, but what are the groundwater impacts that we are not seeing right at the moment? And what kind of impacts are they having on the existing infrastructure? So a lot of concepts to consider. And again, what's the right design criteria? Right now, Florida has 3 different compacts. You got the Southeast Compact, you got the East Central Florida, and you got the Tampa Bay region. So they're trying holistically to kind of manage those areas and get the consistent design criteria amongst the agencies. The problem is, though, is funding. As you guys well know, especially for DOTs. DOT may get funding on one frequency, the counties or cities may get it on another, and then the real issue is what are the competing interests? For the locals, much different scenario for them compared to the DOT. For the locals, they're looking to preserve that land as much as possible. That's high tax dollars when you're on the water. So that's a lot of revenue for them. So, and likewise, just on some stuff that we've heard over the years, in Australia, where slopes have collapsed and that first row homes were gone because of whatever issues, people basically came in and bought up the second row homes because they still wanted that view. They still wanted that access to the nature. So again, same thing in here. People want to be right here. So as we do some of these things, how do we align our vision such that it's not money against money? Because the locals are investing a lot in terms of their infrastructure on what they want to protect. DOT is maybe not worried about the infrastructure as much as they are the roadways. So a whole big, just a different philosophy in terms of the way that two people are approaching the problem, and how do we bring them to the table and kind of get some more synergy and make it work better. Likewise, if we just keep jacking up seawalls, what are the impacts in Florida in terms of storm surge? We're looking at this more, so it's one thing to overcome the tides, but have we also factored in what we're looking at for storm surge and other issues? So as we build these systems up, so now we go from a gravity system to a pump. When we get a tropical system, the first thing that's going to be cut normally is power. So now those pumps are really critical. So as we do these systems, now the pumps have to have generators and have to have a supply to run them and basically flush this water out. So how long is that inundation going to last now with the seawalls being elevated? Is that going to create a far worse situation? And these are some of the things that need to be looked at as we go at this. Excuse me. And then risk allowance. Again, every site specific. You guys have heard it here. Even when we do stormwater, it's site specific. What are the features and conditions within that area that need to be addressed? And how do we manage them properly? And again, give a far greater benefit. If we're going to come up with solutions in here, can it serve 2, 3, 4, or even 5 purposes? Not just the immediate need, but have we done it well enough where we take this out to a greater legacy within that area? So one, we've corrected the problem, but now we've done it far greater, and we leave somebody else in a much better situation as we go forward. And again, risk. What does risk equate to? Fear. I mean, I don't mean to be mean about it, but risk is fear. So how do we abate that risk? And what are those planning things that we need to take into account to mitigate for that fear? And basically what infrastructure needs to be more protected over other? Hospitals, obviously, first responders, some of these other critical destinations for people, those are things that we really need to be focused on. So that's probably where we go with a higher design criteria. And then in other areas where inundation can, it's not going to be as detrimental to the area, that's where we kind of, you can back off on some of that criteria. But again, just stakeholder engagement, planning. Can't say it enough. So now let's talk long term. I was fortunate enough to find, I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the Tampa area, but I found this photo on the internet, and this is Davis Island in Tampa. So back in the good old days, back when you can see some of the dredging equipment up in the north part of that picture, they were dredging all the sand out of Tampa Bay to build that island. And anyways, I found it interesting because nowadays I would love to see that happen, other than in Dubai or some places in the Middle East where they've got all the money and sand sources, a lot easier to do. But what was created way back when. But the thing I want to stress here is, again, the strategy that's going to be employed throughout the region. So even as we have the compacts, like I said, they're still not acting completely in unison. They've got the design criteria that they're achieving or hope to achieve, but it doesn't always work out. So what are those things that we need to do to kind of memorialize some of these agreements and really get the synergy going? And on top of that, with all the money that you guys are seeing that are coming out with grants, how do we apply that grant money? And can we go over different stakeholders or make it a conglomerate and do it all as a one if we're going to get the grant money? Estuaries, that's one thing in Florida that I think has been overlooked. Just me personally, and I say that because a lot of mangrove species now aren't surviving in the environment that they used to because of the sea level rise. So sea level rise coming in, the water elevations are higher, it's more detrimental to the plant health. So now different other types of mangroves are coming into play, and so is that okay? The other thing is upstream tributaries. Tributaries that are draining, discharging to the coastal area directly. You've got nurseries and spawning areas that, the fish are used to. Now they're having to migrate further upstream because of where the brackish water limits are changing, and again, groundwater changes. So are we accounting for all these situations from an ecological standpoint within the coastal environment? Other items, stormwater management. How can we use stormwater now? Like I just mentioned, the tributaries. Can we use stormwater now to kind of fight back saltwater intrusion? Whether it be a blanket that we're going to discharge into the ground or some other mechanism, and then likewise in tributaries that feed these coastal areas, is there a place that we need to now start looking to direct stormwater in there and kind of mitigate for some of those impacts by saltwater intrusion and push it backward towards the ocean where it should be, as opposed to more landward? Again, multipurpose designs, parks. One thing, and as we go further along, you guys know the ESG component of our business, especially as it relates to grants. In Miami Beach, a lot of the places where they found mitigation problem or projects was right where a lot of there was homelessness. Florida has such a good culture for that. It can basically exist all year round. And where a lot of these plans that they had for some of these mitigation projects was displacing homeless. So how do we incorporate that into the plan and then find better places for people to congregate, that aren't, that need to be addressed and aren't being addressed adequately now. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is restoring coastal inlets. In this area, and the reason I have this picture up here is we're working now on a trail in SR A1A, and that's what you see in this area right here. What out here is where old A1A used to exist. And for whatever reason, this community got the benefit of the doubt, and they got the protection along the coastline. So you can see the revetment has been damaged, and now the county is getting ready. This is St. Johns County up in the northeast part of the state. St. Johns County is now getting ready to install a whole new revetment in through here for protection. Conversely, other parts of the beach didn't get the same addressing. So now they're sitting out there, but the way the environment adapts, these people have adapted too. So these homes that are sitting out here, they're not going to get the protection. You can see some of the beach nourishment projects that are going on, or work that's going on up here. But the bottom line is they basically took the homes that they lived in now and they've made them rental properties or, vacation spots. So the same way the environment adapts, so do people. And again, they find a more resourceful way. The good thing is the county's still supporting them. They're still providing, utility services to these areas, but just not the ideal situation. And this is the area that I'm talking about from a regional standpoint. The area that I was telling you about where they have the protection is up in here, and then this is the area that's been left where basically just in beach nourishment. And again, those are some of the decisions that need to be made from a long-term planning standpoint. Where is the best, where is it most impactful to use our resources and protect that coastline and give the people the protection? One thing that I've heard in Florida, and I'm sure this exists elsewhere, what is the state's, the county's, or the city's responsibility in these cases to preserve these areas and make them livable? And again, I don't think anyone's come through on that legality yet to figure out that, the state, because again, you've got a lot of natural changes that are occurring. We equate it to climate change, but we also know that there's been a lot of adaptation and a lot of other things that have happened along the coastline. So the bottom line is how far does that responsibility go to the states, the cities, and the counties to preserve these areas for people to live in that really serve as, again, kind of protection for the mainland? All right, as we start to end up here, coastal permitting. Especially for us in Florida, I can't say this enough. You can see the agencies I've listed here on the side. Obviously, they overlap with a lot of other places. The big thing that needs to be worked on is those relationships. And like much of us, what we're going through, you're getting a lot of turnover at the agencies. After about 2-3 years, the people know the rules real well, and they're leaving and going into the industry because the industry realizes the value of them. So we lose those good long-term relationships. So what I'm going to say is the more you can get in there and memorialize agreements, do it, because it's going to pay benefits and dividends in the end. But the big thing is making sure that you come in with that planning and in a planning stage, because at least for the Florida Department of Transportation, as their work program goes on, if you wait till the design phase, it's too late. It's got to be planning. We've got to plan these things up front early enough. This happens to be a bridge down in Key West. Reason being is this is the picture of the A1A job that I just showed you. Here's the old alignment that's now just a sand road. But what's interesting, getting out to these homes, now turtles are using that area as nesting. So what are those species impacts that we have? So we want to come out here and we want to put all this revetment and protect the beach. But have we upset species habitat. And for us in Florida, obviously, turtles get a lot of consideration. So what are those things that we need to do to mitigate? And you can see some of the agencies here also that deal specifically with species. But what are those things that we need to be better prepared for? And how do we mitigate for habitat, but yet mitigate and protect the coastline against future storms or sea level rise? And again, are there some things that we can do from a regional standpoint with stormwater to make the situation far greater? As it relates to permitting strategies, and again, I'm going to go back to stakeholder engagement. I'm sorry to harp on it, but it's just the thing that needs to be done. You know, the more you have the buy-in and you have a conglomerate of stakeholders that are willing to, you know, support you, I just think that's where you're going to get your far greater lift. And again, combining resources and using them in a much more effective and efficient way. And that's the big thing. So we're not throwing, so one area is not doing improvements and another area is not there yet, and they come in improvements and now things have changed, they're going higher. So adaptability. Can we build adaptability in design, especially seawalls? If some of these projections are right, do we put the seawall at a certain elevation now, but design it such that it can be adapted in the future? And then we can give it the higher height if we need it, or we've already mitigated for what we've got in that area specifically in terms of that regional area. And again, can we find other ways to get incentives from the regulators that would help us with the permitting aspects of the job? What are some of those incentives that we can, you know, encourage them on and demonstrating to them the value and the added benefits that are gained from some of these improvements? So I know I went through this pretty heavy and pretty quickly. I hope it wasn't too much, but you know, you can see the concluding points here. Some of them overlap. Minimizing risks in a smart way. And what I mean by that is, what are those things that we can do more in a planning stage to kind of give us a far better and more robust solution? And again, can we serve more than a single purpose? All right, and if you can see that a little better, I've got alligators all over our bank line there, and that's my version of a living shoreline. So, but thank you guys. Appreciate your time.